Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Watson Michael from Ceylon Institute of English and Leadership. And this time, we have a new guest. She's all the way from Africa at the moment, but originally from the US. Miss Ciara Remerscheid, who is a director at Shortlist Professionals. And she counts vast experience in Asia and in Africa in sustainability and women empowerment as well. So we're going to discuss some interesting things today about Africa. Ciara, welcome, and how are you doing today?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. Just got back to Nairobi. It's a beautiful day, a bit cold, but really, really happy to be here.
All right, awesome. Okay, so it's a bit cold. Okay, that's good because today is a bit of a what can I say, semi-warm day. It was drizzling. Now it's a bit sunny. It's a bit drizzling. All right, great. So now Africa accounts for less than 4% of the global carbon emissions, right? And the continent receives only 3% of the global clean energy funding. Now, and looking at that, over 600 million people in Africa do not have electricity. What are your views on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, and I think it's a really stark imbalance, right? So I've
Yeah.
been working in the energy access space for about 8 years now. And when I started this work, we were on a pathway to reducing the number of people who were without electricity. But because of these demographic trends, because of the way the population is growing, we're actually now, for the first time, I believe this year, seeing that number increase. And so I think when you take a step back, right, and you realize that that 600 million number is growing, I think what it really calls for, right, is an urgent need for us as different development sector experts, stakeholders, to come together and really, for once and for all, find scalable solutions that can start to address this, right? It's on the one hand entirely unfair that a continent that has contributed the least to climate change is experiencing some of its most adverse impacts. And so
Yeah.
I think we all need to start to come together to figure out how exactly do we move the needle on this. And so
Mm,
obviously, there's the need to talk to government, there's the need to talk to the private sector,
yeah.
as well as getting the local populations involved. I mean, anytime you might, so you have not experienced this, but every time I get into a cab in Nairobi, everybody who is a driver or who drives a boda, who drives a bus, they're all aware of the impacts and they all want to see progress being made towards it. So there really is this political will amongst the
Mm.
populations. It's now just about getting those other puzzle pieces kind of put together so that we're starting to solve this problem.
Wow, okay. Now, when you say of Nairobi, it reminds me, I can't remember the couple. There were two films actually I watched. I can't remember. Hallmark movies, wonderful movies like they go to, it was in Africa, right? If I'm not mistaken, in Nairobi, they did some wildlife safaris and it was pretty amazing, right? So I need to check that movie name. It's somewhere in the back of my head. Okay, great. So now, according to the IEA, an African Development Bank, for Africa to meet climate and energy access, the investments need to more than double, like over 199 billion per year by 2030. What is the biggest challenge you see there?
Yeah. I mean, again, there's one way to look at this and just be totally pessimistic, right? And just be like, this is an unsolvable problem. We cannot make progress towards it. I think that attitude is wrong, right? So I
Okay.
think there's, again, different ways to think about this. On the one hand, there are these massive players in the market who really do have the ability to start to invest heavily in renewable infrastructure. So on that side of things, you've got the World Bank, the IMF, these big, huge government programs. So Power Africa,
Yeah.
for example, which is led by the US aid department, as well as the UK's FCDO, the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, right? So there's, on the one hand, a lot of incentive there. I think, so we at Shortlist, we both work with job seekers and with companies. And when you talk to companies on the content, one of their biggest challenges is that they're just unable to find foreign investors to invest within into their companies, right? So there's this pipeline mismatch where you have foreign investors, whether that be VC, private equity, impact investors who are saying, hey, like, where is this pipeline? while you also have companies here saying, I can't access any of these companies. So there's something that also needs to be done in terms of matching those interests. And the other thing, I don't think it's as talked about, but one of the challenges a lot of these companies face is this Forex issue. So they might be getting debt or equity in, dollars, pounds, euros, but they're selling their products and services in, Kenyan shillings, Rwandan francs, rands in South Africa, right? Whatever it might be. And because of the currency fluctuations there, and the lack of stability, it can be quite difficult for them to pay that money back and to be seen as commercially bankable, right? So again, I think it kind of depends probably where you sit on the spectrum of a potential financial provider or a capital provider, but there's lots of ways you can think about this. And there's lots of cool organizations that are thinking about approaches to blended finance, right? So how do you bring both, grant capital, which can take risk, and more commercial capital to be able to get them to see that return that they want to start to create bankable projects. So there's a lot of different things, but I think a lot of it too is just connection between these different capital allocators and how do you start to segment them for what it is that they're specifically and uniquely able to provide. So you start to piece together the investment that's necessary across kind of that investment spectrum of needs.
Wow, all right. So you just did a masterclass in a few sentences. Okay. Right. So now, research by shortlist professionals and FSD Africa, okay, predict with the green economy that 3.3 billion jobs could be created by 2030. Could you elaborate more on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're super proud of this research. It is really fun to do. But I mean, to be totally honest, where this research came from was this need that we felt internally, where we were like, we are trying to prepare Africa's workforce for the jobs. Should I just
Yeah.
start over?
Yeah,
Okay,
please.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay. What did I say? Okay, yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think for us as Shortlist, we're really excited and proud of this work because up until today, this data has never existed. And so what that meant for us as one actor in this space is that we had no line of sight on where this future job growth could be. And so if we
Yeah.
don't have line of sight on that, no one else did as well. And so our programs to date have been really focused on preparing Africa's workforce to be able to take on these jobs in clean energy. And we think a lot about talent pipelining, right? So how do you get
Yeah.
young people the right skill they need to be attractive on the job market? But if you don't know where those jobs are and what type of skill they need, it's really difficult to predict that. So we set out to do this work to give us, our first sort of pass at a roadmap with indications of where we should be, almost placing bets, if you will. And so we, with FSD Africa, went on this, couple months sprint to quickly try to ascertain where will the jobs, new direct jobs, be in the next 5 years across 12 different value chains. And I think the numbers are really encouraging. So this 3.3 million number, on the one hand, it looks small in some ways in comparison to the size of the unemployed population. But when you look at general job growth on the continent, there are only 3 million new jobs across the continent, across all sectors, right? That are being created for 11 million new job seekers annually. So this, of course, is not going to solve that solve that problem, but it's part of the solution. And if you could really figure out how to accelerate it, to
Yeah.
your point earlier, we need more money coming into this. There's a way to go from 3.3 million to the 150 million figure that people do see in terms of job growth potential between now and 2050. So I think for me, where we sit now as we look at this data is how do we now start to go beyond what's predicted as business as usual and accelerate this transition to be tackling this dual issue or tripart issue rather of the need for job creation, the need for energy access, the energy access gap to close, and this need, right, to have more energy production to enable these economies to be more productive and grow.
Yeah. Wow. So super insightful. Okay, I mean, like, okay, you need funding. Okay, but and so many things. But I mean, the numbers are very attractive, and especially for Africa. Wow. Okay. So now, the Ivory Coast and Ghana are the world's largest producers of cocoa, and recently it was affected by crop disease and the changing climate patterns. So, what are the possibilities of sustainable farming in Africa?
Yeah, for sure. So I think if you go to look in our report, the third largest generator of jobs across the continent is in this bucket we refer to as climate smart ag. Because I think, again, the reality is that climate change is here and we have to figure out how to start adapting to it right now, right, to ensure that these folks who might be engaged in agricultural practices, for example, are able to continue to grow their livelihoods and not lose out on this income and to not have less nutritious food on the table, et cetera. And so um, we've worked with a bunch of different companies and there's a lot of different solutions, right? So on the one hand, it's things like solar water pump irrigation, right? Can you more successfully use energy enabled or renewable energy enabled products that are going to enhance your agriculture, that are going to reduce the amount of water you might be using? There's other firms, for example, that are using drones to use drone imagery to see sort of where water tables are and to feed that information directly to farmers so they now know how much water they can use and not deplete the resource, for example. There's other firms that are starting to offer crop, and as a farmer, now you might be covered for that loss and you're not losing your entire income stream for that season of yield that you might otherwise be missing out of. And so for me, what a lot of this technological advancement, what all these companies are doing, is in essence trying to figure out how do you make people who are engaged in this work climate resilient, which in a lot of way has to do with their incomes, right? Because if you're earning enough income or if your income is secured, you'll be able to be resilient to those shocks and absorb perhaps the loss in income, still, pay for your school's child fees, or whatever that might be. And so a lot of it has to do with how we think about protecting that, because the majority of Africa's population is actually engaged in subsistence farming in some form or another. So to not think about how to address this would be a huge oversight.
Wow, super insightful, actually. Right? Great. So, what are your views on deforestation, gender equality, and yeah, the water scarcity in Africa?
Or, I mean, they're three very heady subjects, but they're completely interrelated. And so I would actually think about this by way of an example. So if you think about clean cooking, um, clean cooking has been promoted because presently, dirty cooking, right? So what I mean by that is people burning wood, charcoal, or other types of biomass not projects, products in their home. It's the number one leading cause of premature death for women and girls on the continent. And it's something that like urgently needs to be addressed because of that, right? And so the reasons why they're related, for example, is if you're a woman who's cooking on a traditional stove that's using wood, you're spending hours of your day going to collect this wood. That means that when you aggregate this across the continent, right, you're seeing deforestation as a result of that practice. So that might be, old growth forests, which are the ones that are most important as carbon sinks. It might mean that you're impacting biodiversity, restricting sort of different inhabited potential spaces for different animal species, for different types of growth. It leads to heat increases, right? Because you're getting rid of shade and you're perhaps, in some cases, increasing the rate of desertification, for example. And so all these things are really interrelated. And so when you think about, again, clean cooking as a solution, what's exciting about it is it eliminates the need for women to do this. It means that you're not deforesting. It also means now that women are able to have time to go spend in other productive ways that might be a better fit for their time and what their life requires of them, right? If you're not now having to spend 4 to 5 hours a day collecting water, collecting firewood, whatever that might be, you can now engage more productively, and perhaps you want to start a small business, or perhaps you just want to spend more time with your family. For example, you might, and often women do, have unfair care burden. So this gives them more space to be able to be present moms, caregivers for perhaps older family members, and that type of thing. And so to me, it's really hard to decouple those three things. You need to think about them together because, again, as part of this sort of equitable transition, you have to think about gender as a part of that, to ensure that women won't be left behind, as we see progress being made.
Wow. You have just explained very well about women empowerment. Okay, so and I'm really happy. Okay, you're doing a phenomenal job, especially right in the continent and addressing key issues like this. Okay, so that's something not which many will do, but you are actually an inspiration for many, and I'm sure in time to come on the long term, many good things will happen with you there. And yeah, so Sophia, Ciara, thank you very much for taking time and doing this with us, the podcast. Any final message to our listeners and viewers? Yeah. Any final message to our viewers and listeners?
Yeah. Yes. So, I mean, I think for me, there's a way to look at where we are presently and say that there's no point, right? Like, why are we trying to push this? We've already lost this battle. But I am an incurable optimist. And with that in mind, I think Africa actually stands at a really pivotal moment. There are these large challenges, from climate change to energy access, to gender inequity. But while those present, what could be insurmountable challenges, they also present unique opportunities. Africa has the most abundance of solar in the world. And if we could harness and invest in this green economy, we really do have the potential to create millions of jobs, which in turn creates more resilient communities and can drive sustainable growth for individuals, their families, communities, and the continent at large. So I think this really is a moment where we have the opportunity to seize the future and promote Africa's green promise in a way that hasn't been possible before. So I still remain excited about what I think it is that we can achieve here, and I hope that others see this as an opportunity and use their expertise to forward this goal and this dream.
Wow. Well, well emphasized. So, Ciara, thank you very much once again for taking time and doing this valuable podcast with us.
Yeah, of course, anytime. It was great chatting with you.
Absolutely.